achieved.
India, the land of wonders. A land where there was wisdom when the rest of the world was learning the ropes of civilization. Amidst the malice of the Dark Ages, India gave the world a glimmer of hope. In the unstable times of violence and turmoil, a revolutionary principle was born in India. Ahimsa Paramo Dharma. Non-violence is the highest virtue. The idea of non-violence, which is still relevant and a core philosophy of this rapidly growing nation. Gandhiji's values and philosophy of ahimsa has inspired generations. India believes in making the world a beautiful place where everyone is part of one big family. A beautiful place. Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam. One world, one family. Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam, ancient Indian philosophy that considers the entire population as one giant family. A family that prospers with each other without any conflict or aggression. In today's age of seamless geographical boundaries and international partnerships, Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam seems like the necessity of the future. India banks on its cultural strength and power that emphasizes on moral high ground. Sarvajan Hidai, Sarvajan Sukhai, for everyone's wellness, for everyone's happiness. With a harmonious ideology at the core, India believes in winning the hearts and admiration of the whole world. Since its independence struggle, India has shown the world that non-violence and all-inclusiveness along with spiritualism, yoga, Bollywood films, classical dances, and the ever-popular lip-smacking cuisines are Indian inherent strength. And attract the world to this wonderful, hospitable country and its warm people. A nation that prides itself on its heritage. India is a shining example of how unity, harmony, and oneness combined with culture can conquer the whole world. Proud of its past, India is moving forward into the future. In a rapidly changing technological landscape, India has emerged as a technological giant. With its booming information technology, diaspora spread all around the globe. India dominated the world in intellectual prowess. From tech titans to humble startup ventures, India is making her presence felt all over the global IT scene. Looking at a future that is highly progressive and all-inclusive, India draws strength from its ancient civilization and rich history. Learning several lessons in morality and humility, India believes in leading by example. A land where modern technology and progress work alongside with old traditions and culture, India is a land of wonders indeed, where the past seamlessly exists with the present and becomes a part of the future. Today, hand in hand with its ancient civilization and modern values, India is a landscape of diversity, tolerance, and inclusiveness. Using its public goods such as yoga and Ayurveda, India has spawned some of the world's greatest religions, art, and literature. Being the biggest and most vibrant democracy in the world, it is a melting pot of culture and traditions that promotes the subliminal message of Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam. Ainijah parobeti ganana laghu chetasam. Udar charitana tu Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam. This is mine, that is theirs. Only narrow-minded believe in this divide. Wise, however, believe for the whole world as one family.
Concept of soft power is not very old. It has been just about maybe a couple of decades that the world started discussing about soft power. And in the Indian context, I believe there are some features which are very unique to the idea of India of soft power. And what are these features? I believe basically in the Indian context, India's soft power starts with a whole lot of attraction towards the idea of India, which we experience in every nook and corner of the world. And this particular attraction and curiosity about the idea of India takes us to a fund of goodwill that India enjoys all over the world. Now, when we talk about soft power, this goodwill has to be taken to a different level and converted into a kind of understanding about the idea of India. The moment world starts understanding the idea of India, I believe our objective of soft power could be very easily achieved.
India, the land of wonders. A land where there was wisdom when the rest of the world was learning the ropes of civilization. Amidst the malice of the Dark Ages, India gave the world a glimmer of hope. In the unstable times of violence and turmoil, a revolutionary principle was born in India. Ahimsa Parmo Dharma. Non-violence is the highest virtue. The idea of non-violence, which is still relevant and a core philosophy of this rapidly growing nation. Gandhiji's values and philosophy of ahimsa has inspired generations. India believes in making the world a beautiful place where everyone is part of one big family. Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam, one world, one family. Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam, ancient Indian philosophy that considers the entire population as one giant family. A family that prospers with each other without any conflict or aggression. In today's age of seamless geographical boundaries and international partnerships, Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam seems like the necessity of the future. India banks on its cultural strength and power that emphasizes on moral high ground. Sarvajan Hidai, Sarvajan Sukhai, for everyone's wellness, for everyone's happiness. With a harmonious ideology at the core, India believes in winning the hearts and admiration of the whole world. Since its independence struggle, India has shown the world that non-violence and all-inclusiveness along with spiritualism, yoga, Bollywood films, classical dances, and the ever-popular lip-smacking cuisines are Indian inherent strength. And attract the world to this wonderful, hospitable country and its warm people. A nation that prides itself on its heritage. India is a shining example of how unity, harmony, and oneness combined with culture can conquer the whole world. Proud of its past, India is moving forward into the future. In a rapidly changing technological landscape, India has emerged as a technological giant. With its booming information technology, diaspora spread all around the globe. India dominated the world in intellectual prowess. From tech titans to humble startup ventures, India's making her presence felt all over the global IT scene. Looking at a future that is highly progressive and all-inclusive, India draws strength from its ancient civilization and rich history. Learning several lessons in morality and humility, India believes in leading by example. A land where modern technology and progress work alongside with old traditions and culture. India is a land of wonders indeed, where the past seamlessly exists with the present and becomes a part of the future. Today, hand in hand with its ancient civilization and modern values, India is a landscape of diversity, tolerance, and inclusiveness. Using its public goods such as yoga and Ayurveda, India has spawned some of the world's greatest religions, art, and literature. Being the biggest and most vibrant democracy in the world, it is a melting pot of culture and traditions that promotes the subliminal message of Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam. Ainichaha parobeti ganana laghu chetasam. Udar charitana tu Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam. This is mine, that is theirs. Only narrow-minded believe in this divide. Wise, however, believe for the whole world as one family.
Concept of soft power is not very old. It has been just about maybe a couple of decades that the world started discussing about soft power. And in the Indian context, I believe there are some features which are very unique to the idea of India of soft power. And what are these features? I believe basically in the Indian context, India's soft power starts with a whole lot of attraction towards the idea of India, which we experience in every nook and corner of the world. And this particular attraction and curiosity about the idea of India takes us to a fund of goodwill that India enjoys all over the world. Now, when we talk about soft power, this goodwill has to be taken to a different level and converted into a kind of understanding about the idea of India. The moment world starts understanding the idea of India, I believe our objective of soft power could be very easily achieved.
India, the land of wonders. A land where there was wisdom when the rest of the world was learning the ropes of civilization. Amidst the malice of the Dark Ages, India gave the world a glimmer of hope. In the unstable times of violence and turmoil, a revolutionary principle was born in India. Ahimsa Parmo Dharma. Non-violence is the highest virtue. The idea of non-violence, which is still relevant and a core philosophy of this rapidly growing nation. Gandhiji's values and philosophy of ahimsa has inspired generations. India believes in making the world a beautiful place where everyone is part of one big family. Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam, one world, one family. Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam, ancient Indian philosophy that considers the entire population as one giant family, a family that prospers with each other without any conflict or aggression. In today's age of seamless geographical boundaries and international partnerships, Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam seems like the necessity of the future. India banks on its cultural strength and power that emphasizes on moral high ground. Sarvajan Hidai, Sarvajan Sukhai, for everyone's wellness, for everyone's happiness. With a harmonious ideology at the core, India believes in winning the hearts and admiration of the whole world. Since its independence struggle, India has shown the world that non-violence and all-inclusiveness along with spiritualism, yoga, Bollywood films, classical dances, and the ever-popular lip-smacking cuisines are Indian inherent strength. And attract the world to this wonderful, hospitable country and its warm people. A nation that prides itself on its heritage. India is a shining example of how unity, harmony, and oneness combined with culture can conquer the whole world. Proud of its past, India is moving forward into the future. In a rapidly changing technological landscape, India has emerged as a technological giant. With its booming information technology, diaspora spread all around the globe. India dominated the world in intellectual prowess. From tech titans to humble startup ventures, India is making her presence felt all over the global IT scene. Looking at a future that is highly progressive and all-inclusive, India draws strength from its ancient civilization and rich history. Learning several lessons in morality and humility, India believes in leading by example. A land where modern technology and progress work alongside with old traditions and culture, India is a land of wonders indeed, where the past seamlessly exists with the present and becomes a part of the future. Today, hand in hand with its ancient civilization and modern values, India is a landscape of diversity, tolerance, and inclusiveness. Using its public goods such as yoga and Ayurveda, India has spawned some of the world's greatest religions, art, and literature. Being the biggest and most vibrant democracy in the world, it is a melting pot of culture and traditions that promotes the subliminal message of Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam. Ainijaha paroveti ganana laghu chetasam. Udar charitana tu Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam. This is mine, that is theirs. Only narrow-minded believe in this divide. Wise, however, believe for the whole world as one family.
concept of soft power is not very old. It has been just about maybe a couple of decades that the world started discussing about soft power. And in the Indian context, I believe there are some features which are very unique to the idea of India of soft power. And what are these features? I believe basically in the Indian context, India's soft power starts with a whole lot of attraction towards the idea of India, which we experience in every nook and corner of the world. And this particular attraction and curiosity about the idea of India takes us to a fund of goodwill that India enjoys all over the world. Now, when we talk about soft power, this goodwill has to be taken to a different level and converted into a kind of understanding about the idea of India. The moment world starts understanding the idea of India, I believe our objective of soft power could be very easily achieved.
India, the land of wonders. A land where there was wisdom when the rest of the world was learning the ropes of civilization. Amidst the malice of the Dark Ages, India gave the world a glimmer of hope. In the unstable times of violence and turmoil, a revolutionary principle was born in India. Ahimsa Paramo Dharma. Non-violence is the highest virtue. The idea of non-violence, which is still relevant and a core philosophy of this rapidly growing nation. Gandhiji's values and philosophy of ahimsa has inspired generations. India believes in making the world a beautiful place where everyone is part of one big family. Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam, one world, one family. Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam, ancient Indian philosophy that considers the entire population as one giant family. A family that prospers with each other without any conflict or aggression. In today's age of seamless geographical boundaries and international partnerships, Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam seems like the necessity of the future. India banks on its cultural strength and power that emphasizes on moral high ground. Sarvajan Hidai, Sarvajan Sukhai, for everyone's wellness, for everyone's happiness. With a harmonious ideology at the core, India believes in winning the hearts and admiration of the whole world. Since its independence struggle, India has shown the world that non-violence and all-inclusiveness along with spiritualism, yoga, Bollywood films, classical dances, and the ever-popular lip-smacking cuisines are Indian inherent strength. And attract the world to this wonderful, hospitable country and its warm people. A nation that prides itself on its heritage. India is a shining example of how unity, harmony, and oneness combined with culture can conquer the whole world. Proud of its past, India is moving forward into the future. In a rapidly changing technological landscape, India has emerged as a technological giant. With its booming information technology, diaspora spread all around the globe. India dominated the world in intellectual prowess. From tech titans to humble startup ventures, India is making her presence felt all over the global IT scene. Looking at a future that is highly progressive and all-inclusive, India draws strength from its ancient civilization and rich history. Learning several lessons in morality and humility, India believes in leading by example. A land where modern technology and progress work alongside with old traditions and culture. India is a land of wonders indeed, where the past seamlessly exists with the present and becomes a part of the future. Today, hand in hand with its ancient civilization and modern values, India is a landscape of diversity, tolerance, and inclusiveness. Using public goods such as yoga and Ayurveda, India has spawned some of the world's greatest religions, art, and literature. Being the biggest and most vibrant democracy in the world, it is a melting pot of culture and traditions that promotes the subliminal message of Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam. Ainichaha Paroveti Ganana Laghu Chetasam Udar Charitana tu Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam. This is mine, that is theirs. Only narrow-minded believe in this divide. Wise, however, believe for the whole world as one family.
Concept of soft power is not very old. It has been just about maybe a couple of decades that the world started discussing about soft power. And in the Indian context, I believe there are some features which are very unique to the idea of India of soft power. And what are these features? I believe basically in the Indian context, India's soft power starts with a whole lot of attraction towards the idea of India, which we experience in every nook and corner of the world. And this particular attraction and curiosity about the idea of India takes us to a fund of goodwill that India enjoys all over the world. Now, when we talk about soft power, this goodwill has to be taken to a different level and converted into a kind of understanding about the idea of India. The moment world starts understanding the idea of India, I believe our objective of soft power could be very easily achieved.
India, the land of wonders. A land where there was wisdom when the rest of the world was learning the ropes of civilization. Amidst the malice of the Dark Ages, India gave the world a glimmer of hope. In the unstable times of violence and turmoil, a revolutionary principle was born in India. Ahimsa Parmo Dharma. Non-violence is the highest virtue. The idea of non-violence, which is still relevant and a core philosophy of this rapidly growing nation. Gandhiji's values and
We are all set now. Good afternoon, everyone. Today we have with us President ICCR. We have DG ICCR. We have Dr. Deshpande, who is the convener of this webinar. We have Dr. Bapat of the Bandarwada Oriental Research Center. And we have two speakers of today's webinar. I must thank Dr. Deshpande for taking this initiative and bringing this project to the fruition because last time in March we were supposed to have this conference, not in virtual format but in person, in March, but somehow due to the COVID pandemic, it could not be held. But with the guidance and guidance of our present ICCR and efforts made by Dr. Deshpande, this seminar is a 3-day seminar, which is taking place. So a lot of efforts have gone into this one because of paucity of time. But at the same time, so I think we have lined up really very good speakers who are going to talk about different facets of Indology. But this the conference of Indology. This is the fourth edition of this conference. So ICCL has been very active last year. Conferences in the past. We have had 3 editions before, and this is the 4th edition. The theme of this edition is very good, and I think we have got 2 excellent speakers today. And Indology is a very important subject for ICCR, and that is the reason why we have been propagating this initiative. Today's keynote speaker is President ICCR, Dr. Vinay Sahasrabudhe, who has always been a source of knowledge and vision for our organization. He has been a strong votary and a proponent of Indology, and at the same time, he is also a very strong proponent of India's soft power. So we are really very fortunate to have your guidance as far as Indology as well as India's soft power promotion is concerned. We have, as I said, Dr. Deshpande, Dr. Bapat also, so with whom we are collaborating. At the very last event, so we have got this opportunity to collaborate with the Bandarwada's Oriental Research Center, and we are really very grateful that they have also been roped in. And we have these 2 very eminent speakers today, and we have tomorrow and then 2 more on the last day. Today's speakers we have with us is Professor Danilo, who is a Padma Awardee and has authored several books on Indian culture, civilization, and knowledge systems. Right now, he is a professor at IIT Gandhinagar, teaching Indian civilization and heritage. The second speaker is Dr. Bakchi, who is based in Berlin, and he is an Indologist, philosopher, and scholar of intellectual history. I'm sure the contribution that will be made by our speakers will be very immense, and this initiative that we are following for next 3 days will be useful to us. Now, let me request Dr. Bapat to say a few words, and followed by Dr. Deshpande. So, over to you, Dr. Bapat.
Thanks indeed, sir. I am Srinanda Bapat, the Registrar of the Bhandarkar Oriental Research Institute, and it's a great honor to speak about my institute for 5 minutes. The institute was established in 1917, that is 103 years ago, and we are known all over the world for our publication of the critical edition of the Mahabharata, which we could bring out with an effort of 50 years. And it was inaugurated by Professor Sarvapalli Radhakrishnan, the then President of India. And we also have a publications department which has brought out excellent publications like the History of Dharma Shastra by P.V. Kane, then 97 volumes of the Annals of the Bhandarkar Oriental Research Institute, and we are in the 98th volume of the research journal. And we have also, to our credit, the Vedic bibliography by our erstwhile secretary, Dr. R.N. Dandekar. Then to tell you more, the office of the Sanskrit Commission of the Government of India was situated at the Bhandarkar Institute because Professor Dandekar was the secretary of the Sanskrit Commission in 1956-57. Nextly, we have a very good collection of manuscripts. We have in all 28,000 manuscripts in our possession. And out of them, uh, the manuscripts of the Rigveda are recognized by the UNESCO in the Memory of the World Register. And we also possess 5 manuscripts which are recognized by the Government of India as the Vijnana Nidhi manuscripts. Further, we have a manuscripts conservation center and manuscripts resource center under the National Mission for Manuscripts. The Bhandarkar Institute has an excellent collection of printed books, and our books library, like 1,00,000 books. This library was initiated by the donation of books by Sir R.G. Bhandarkar himself in 1917. Now, the institute has also undertaken the digitization of the very important books of our collection, and we have brought out a digital library, and the library website is borilib.com, and we are handling it with the help of the CDAC. And we are also developing our infrastructure. So our old press building has been converted into an auditorium, which is named Sri Navalmal Firodia Auditorium, and we are also bringing up an amphitheater which will hold something like an audience of about 1,500, and which will be a major facility for cultural activities in Pune. Now, these are the activities of the institute as such, and we are heading to a new century of our activities, and we have also entered into the field of conducting online courses. So only recently during the lockdown, we held 3 courses. One was Introduction to Heritage, the other was Sources of Heritage, and the third was Introduction to the Vedas. And time and again, we have to hold repetitive batches of these courses. And we are also in line to run a course on the history and culture of Maharashtra, particularly ancient history and culture of Maharashtra. So these are the activities of the institute, and we help people with the services of our library as well as our manuscripts. And you are all welcome to the institute whenever you find time. And of course, we are eager to meet each other in person. But time we have to be careful. So take good care of yourself, and please visit our institute. We'll certainly have an honor to welcome you all. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Bapat. Over to you, Dr. Deshpande now. So please go ahead.
Audible to everyone? Hello? Am I audible to everyone? ये देखो मेरी आवाज नहीं आ रही है. म्यूट है ना अभी ये?
Yes, you are audible. Yes.
हाँ.
You are audible. You are audible.
Okay. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you, Shri Piseji, the DDG of ICCR, and Dr. Srinan Bapatji, the Registrar of Bori. It's a matter of great pleasure and privilege for me to be associated with this webinar on issues and perspectives in Indology as its convener. This webinar is a continuation of a seminar which was to be held in March 2020 in Indian Institute of Advanced Studies in Shimla, but it had to be postponed due to the COVID pandemic. The issues we were supposed to discuss in that seminar were of the nature of looking at Indology retrospectively and prospectively at the discipline of Indology. Although the 3-day seminar could not be held, we did organize a one-day roundtable in Shimla with the participation of those who could somehow reach Shimla. So the ICCR has thought it fit to organize a webinar to continue the deliberations left unfinished in that seminar. I take this opportunity to welcome Professor Michel Benino, Dr. Jaydeep Bagchi, Professor Arvind Jamkhedkar ji, Professor Radhavallabh Tripathi ji, Dr. Nandita Krishna ji, and Professor Deepak Kannal ji for this webinar, And I'm sure their presence in this webinar will make this webinar a very fruitful event. Friends, function of a seminar or a webinar on Indology is to engage with this discipline, or what may be properly called Bharat Vidya, in its various aspects, so that one gains a true understanding of Indian heritage. In this sense, any discipline of thought needs to be revisited again and again in terms of its presuppositions. It needs a rectification in terms of its findings and constant revisions in terms of its conclusions. Indology is no exception to this general rule, and any good webinar or a seminar is expected to perform the task of revisiting, rectification, and revision either of a particular issue or the discipline of Indology itself. But in doing all this, one thing is self-evident, namely that Indology has to be Indo-centric. That is to say, Indology cannot survive with a colonial mindset which viewed India as the other of the Europe and therefore not comparable to European civilization. But on the other hand, Indology cannot be narrow and exclusive to the extent that it loses its ability to understand India's cultural and civilizational ethos in proper perspective. Today, the discipline of Indology is oscillating between two extremes, between the kind of orthodoxy with its colonial mindset towards Indian civilization, and on the other hand, various superficial and uninformed reactions to this orthodoxy. Without getting trapped into any of these extremes, what is needed is the robust Indology, which will be true to the spirit and substance of India's rich, varied, and living cultural heritage. This would require the appropriate epistemology and methodology to perform the twin functions, namely of informed criticism of the existing paradigm of Indology and the construction of alternate Indology or the new Indology, so as to say, to represent Indian civilization in its true spirit. Friends, today we have Dr. Vinay Sahasrabuddhe, the President of Indian Council of Cultural Relations, amongst us to deliver the keynote address. Dr. Sahasrabuddhe needs no introduction. He is one of the most articulate intellectuals who spell out the truly indigenous point of view. Following him for today and for the next 2 days, we have a group of 6 very eminent Indologists who will address 2 types of issues during the course of these 3 days. The first 2 presentations today by Professor Michel Danino and Dr. Jaideep Bagchi take up the issue of the state of Indology in its theory and practice. Thereafter, the 4 presentations, 2 for tomorrow and 2 for day after tomorrow, will address the larger issues such as the study of Sanskrit sources and the medieval history of India, then the environment and Indian history, then tradition of anonymity and Indian sculptural traditions, and finally, why Natya Shastra is a neglected discipline in Indology. As can be seen, these issues are not restricted to particular text or period or a monument or even a historical figure, but they deal with some important issues which do not seem to figure in the current day Indological researches. I will have some time to speak about these themes at the beginning of each presentation. So with this very brief introduction for the very idea of this webinar and also a very brief introduction of the speakers, I now invite Dr. Vinay Sahasrabudhe to give his keynote address. Dr. Sahasrabudhe.
Thank you, Dr. Sharad Deshpande. It's indeed a matter of great honor to be amongst very learned scholars and truly speaking authorities on various facets of Indology, namely Dr. Srinand Bapat, who is the registrar of the very well-known Bhandarkar Oriental Research Institute of Pune. Also, it is a matter of great honor to have Professor Michel Danino, who is such a prolific writer, and his deep insights into Indian culture and Indian thought traditions are very well known. And also to have Dr. Jaideep Bagchi, who is from the Hindu University of America and who is going to speak about a very important subject, which is about the future of Indology. So finding myself in the midst of such a scholarly company, I think is a matter of great privilege. And I'm indeed thankful to all who have requested me to be here to offer my opening remarks. I know while the schedule mentions my speech as keynote address, but in the company of so very learned scholars, I think let us describe it only as opening remarks. It cannot necessarily be a keynote address because neither I am Indologist, if I may say so, and nor do I have any insight about various facets of Indology in general. I'm here basically because as president of the Indian Council for Cultural Relations, which has been working with several scholars from across the world on subjects related to Indology. We also have instituted an award for an eminent Indologist every year. And we would like to work more in collaboration with researchers and scholars and members of the academia coming from various parts of the globe. And in that capacity, basically, I'm here to share some of my thoughts. Let me at the outset say that it's really very satisfying to have this conference, which was originally planned in the month of March, but due to COVID-19, we had to postpone it, and we kept postponing it as we were hopeful that things will become normal. But now we decided to make it happen virtually, and the conference is happening thanks to the painstakingly curated setup by Dr. Sharad Deshpande, because he has been working on various themes and coordinating with speakers, and also trying to have as many prominent academics as possible as participants for this particular conference. So at the outset, let me thank Dr. Deshpande for his guidance, for his participation, and for his leadership that he provided for the conduct of this particular conference. Friends, earlier in 2018, when we had met at St. Petersburg in Russia for a similar conference, I had spoken about the need for evolving what can be called as new Indology. The thought process behind that observation was basically emphasizing the need for revisiting the traditional approach to Indology, to which Dr. Deshpande has already elaborately referred to. To understand India's past, as a student of India, if not Indology, I can say so, evolving an understanding of India at present is also critical, and vice versa. Our recently departed past president, Shri Pranav Mukherjee, formerly President of India,
had also stressed the need for foreign scholars to build live contacts with Indian scholars and universities to have a proper grasp on what all is going on in the field of Indology at present. And I believe his advice continues to be a guiding principle for all of us in the future as well. A continuous self-assessment and self-introspection, as we know, keeps discipline of thought intellectually alert and relevant to the inquiry itself. Indology, which aims to study India's past and present, is no exception to this rule. There is a growing awareness amongst the Indologists, especially in India, that the classical Indology, which was a result of colonial processes, did not represent India's past in all its aspects, especially with reference to India's achievements in calculus, astronomy, and navigation. This gave an impression that Indian civilization lacked a scientific temper and technological flair. Indian civilization was portrayed as mythical, esoteric, and otherworldly, with no sense of history, devoid of scientific temper, incapable of developing theoretical and practical sciences. Whereas the Greek and Egyptian civilizations, once upon a time, very influential and also culturally rich, have nonetheless ceased to exist in the course of history. Indian civilization has survived over the last 5,000 years or so, despite disruptions and long periods of subjugation by foreign powers. The resilience of Indian culture lies in its extraordinary capacity to assimilate and even integrate religious beliefs, languages, and ways of living from other cultures by keeping its core of values, religious, spiritual, and ethical, intact. This remarkable feature of Indian culture invites Indologists to explore a history of India's past with a fresh outlook, using new methods of interpretation of Indian culture that comprises the rich philosophies of Vedanta, Buddhism, and Jainism. Among all humanistic disciplines, Indology is probably the most vulnerable to political ideologies, positions, and perspectives. However, there is a need to develop a new Indology which, on the one hand, will be free from colonial mindset with its many contested presuppositions about Indian civilization, and on the other hand, it will be free from extreme positions on India's past, its value systems, religious beliefs, and cultural practices. The new Indology will have to work on the vast middle ground that exists in between extreme positions. As rightly referred to by Professor Deshpande, it is high time that Indology as knowledge system evolved mainly in parts of Europe, majorly in Germany. The idea of revisiting the entire gamut of issues about Indology requires to be a universal attempt, an attempt in which every part of the globe perhaps can contribute and should be contributing. It is needed that India should be seen as India. Eurocentric perspective cannot be thrusted on the global community of researchers. To look at India from this perspective smacks of reinforcing colonial outlook if we continue to look at India from the Eurocentric approach. And therefore, I would suggest that there is an urgent need to ensure that India is looked at as India and not measured by any other yardsticks. There has been, as I said, references to the need for evolving new Indology in the past also. Today also, Professor Deshpande has referred to that. I also underscored the need. But I would suggest all the very eminent scholars gathered over here to also attempt some kind of a definition of new Indology. And how do we achieve the evolution of this new Indology?
that roadmap also requires to be brought before the uh, community of scholars so that there is some kind of a unanimity about it and people also take all these efforts with due seriousness, which is very required as everybody understands. At the end, I only would urge all the scholars and academics to try and help the process of evolution of this new Indology in whichever way possible. Indology can never be a moribund stream of knowledge. It is, and it must continue to be a live wire process of knowledge acquisition and insight gathering. As what we say in our Indian thought process, Nitya Nutan, Chirapuratan, something which is old also renews itself and continues with this process of renewal. I think that perhaps brings us to the core of the deliberations that we are going to engage into in another 2 days, in next 2 days as well. Once again, I thank Dr. Sharad Deshpande and all the participants here. Dr. Jamkhedkar is here. Several other eminent Indologists are going to join us virtually. Once again, I welcome all of them. I thank all of them for their participation and their guidance in helping ICCR to continue with this to continue on this path of finding newer aspects of Indology and moving towards, as what I have described, new Indology. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Sahasrabuddeji, for this keynote speech, which will set the tone for today's, specifically for today's two presentations. In your keynote address, you have highlighted the need for the emergence of new Indology and also the issues that Indology will be addressing too. I now invite Professor Michel Danino to give his speech, which he has titled as The Uneven Playing Field of Indology. As the very title suggests, that there are different fields and fields of Indological research, and there is no parity amongst them. So this kind of unevenness has to be, first of all, identified, focused, and then one has to move forward with the idea of new Indology. Now, Professor Michel Danino also needs no introduction, but for our viewers, which are large in number, I am told that around 200 persons shown their interest in attending this, and right now I think around 60 persons are actually attending this webinar, which I think is a fairly good success, I should say. Professor Michel Danino is working at present as visiting professor in IIT Gandhinagar, and he is running a course in archaeological sciences at the center in IIT Gandhinagar. Born in 1956, Michel Danino has been living in India since 1977 and is an Indian citizen. As Dr. Sahasrabudde has mentioned, the government of India has conferred on him one of the highest civilian awards, Padma Shri. Professor Danino is a member of ICHR and is currently a member of Indian National Commission for History of Science. His other interests include nature conservation, a field in which he has deeply and actively engaged in during his stay in the Nilgiris from 1982 to 2003. This was a very brief introduction of Professor Michel Danino, and now I invite him to present his speech. Professor Danino.
Namaste. I hope I'm audible.
Yes. You are.
Thank you so much, Sharaji, and many thanks to ICCR, to all the earlier speakers, including Dr. Sahasrabuddheji, for their brilliant introductions. I think that already a lot has been put in seeds, and we can see that we are dealing with a very important central question of how to define or redefine or revisit the field of Indology, which has been a field of fascination for many Western, first of all, European scholars, and then beyond Europe, for now something like almost 3 centuries. Let's remember that it began with the hunt for the Rig Veda in the 18th century, which sent a number of French and other travelers to India in search of the manuscripts of the Rig Veda, which were actually peacefully sitting in the National Library, at that time Royal Library of France, for already a few decades, but they were not identified. Nobody knew that they were already sitting in Paris, and everybody was searching for these manuscripts in India. And out of this, a whole quest began. Initially, I should very briefly and maybe in a simplistic manner, and I'm sure that the great scholar Joydeep Bakshi, who is with us, will make it much clearer. Initially, there was a kind of a romantic imagination of India, whereby India posed a challenge to the Christian civilization of Europe, and that challenge was welcomed by a number of Enlightenment figures, including in France, of course, the great Voltaire, who wrote a lot about India without actually having much in terms of reliable material and almost no access to any Indian text as yet. Of course, not in any original language, but not even in a translation. So there was a lot of, a clever use of ancient India, ancient China, also to a little extent, ancient Egypt sometimes, to pose a basic challenge to European civilization that, look, we are not the oldest, we are not necessarily the most progressive, perhaps there were more advanced cultures, perhaps there were cultures which were able to live without the kind of intolerance and the kind of persecution that the Christian civilization has promoted, and this is and conquest. This is the kind of speech that you find under Enlightenment figures. But then afterwards, as as colonialism expanded and as the British tightened their control over India, very different kind of discourse started in the first half of the 19th century, when there was a desire to understand India to some extent, but actually to fit India in certain predetermined frameworks. And this I will not expand on this, because I'm sure Dr. Joydeep Bakshi will have a lot to say on this. Rather, what I would like to do is that, having said that, India counted a lot of admirers among Western scholars, as well as a lot of detractors. So people who either found this civilization among the richest and brightest in the world, or just the other way around, the famous case of James Mill, who found everything condemnable and deplorable and degraded in Indian civilization. So there were both extremes, and there were, of course, a lot of people in between. But it's not really the matter of appreciation, it's the matter of the framework, ideological frameworks of ideas within which they were operating. And I would like to start my exploration, brief exploration with this, in the sense that I'm going to basically divide my talk along 3 lines, with one caveat to start with, which is that there have been a number of very great Western scholars of India, without any doubt whatsoever, all the way to today. Names are not required, but I personally keep reading a lot of Western scholars to discover, unknown aspects or perspectives on Indian civilization. And I find that there are still quite a lot who are genuine But again, that is not really the point. The point is that even they have to operate within certain frameworks. So let me first deal with the first problem that I see in the definition of Indology, which remains, as we all know, very much, and as our two earlier speakers, Dr. Sahasrabuddheji and Sharad Deshpandeji have already highlighted very well, remains very much Eurocentric. It remains defined by the West. So this India did not create the discipline of Indology. India had other ways to look at herself, which in fact we still are not properly studying. But that I'll come to last, perhaps. My first point is that there were quite a large number of colonial stereotyping of India, sometimes favorable, sometimes unfavorable, but once again, that is not really the point. The point was that these stereotypes started operating in a very steamrolling manner in the 19th century, and everybody had to fit in these stereotypes in one way or another. Even many Indian scholars, at least for those who were engaging with European scholars, so let us say Indian Indologists who wrote in English primarily, they also had to somehow fit in that framework. So there were a number of colonial stereotypes, some of which have been brilliantly summed up already by Dr. Sahasrabuddheji, so I will not repeat them. But I would like still to mention two or three. And the first is about the Rig Veda. The Rig Veda was seen as the source of Indian civilization, and in some ways it is so. But immediately it was fitted in a military conquering framework of one race, conquering the indigenous races. And even though today scholars are a little careful, not all by the way, but most are a little careful to avoid the racial framework, nevertheless, the basic interpretation of Rig Veda as a text of war or battle between different clans, and one of which is more conquering, dominating, and finally has the upper hand and expands all over India its ideology, its caste system, its language, Sanskrit, and so on. This scenario continues. But when you actually look at the Rig Veda very closely, you will find that there is not one realistic physical description of warfare, not a single one, which is not metaphorical. You will find also that even though we are told again and again that the so-called Aryans, and I'm not going to deal with the Aryan invasion theory today, that is not my point, brought the horse-driven chariot with spoked wheels into India, and that was the instrument of their conquest. There is not a single mantra, and I recently authored a long paper which Indian Institute of Advanced Study in Shimla is publishing, I hope, very soon. You will not find a single passage in the Rig Veda where you have together the horse-drawn chariot, and a spoked wheel. It does not exist. There is a complete invention in the way we read this fundamental text, and we remain hypnotized by this initial framework of interpretation, which was, of course, nothing but a replica of the colonial model. And this has been said by many, many scholars, including Thomas Troutman and others, where you saw the white race, expanding into Africa, expanding into Asia, expanding into the Americas, and dominating, of course, the indigenous ethnic groups. And they therefore projected this whole image onto the Rig Veda, where actually it does not exist. And this was never how India herself had looked at the Rig Veda in the first place. So this was one example of an imposition of an ideological framework which actually survives today, and which is taken as kind of granted, to the point that scholars who disagree with this framework, and there are some very fine ones, and it's not a question of nationality. We have Indian scholars disagreeing, we have Western scholars, like for example Karen Thompson, or You have quite a few others. The Greek scholar, I have a blank just now, but he is well known, and I will mention his name in a moment. So they have all objected to this framework, but they are not heard. And they are not heard for a reason that I will make clear in my second point now, which I am coming to in a minute. But before I come to it, I will mention a few other very stubborn stereotypes. For example, the fact that Buddhism and Jainism rose in rebellion against the Vedic schools. And this you find repeated again and again in all the textbooks, in all the encyclopedia, in all the fundamental teaching about ancient India. And yes, of course, there were doctrinal differences, and you do find them in the texts, but there was also so much in common that was, shared, a shared platform, a shared heritage, all notions of dharma, karma, rebirth, and much more, which is beyond dispute. And you can simply see that there were nothing but different schools of thought. Even the label of new religions is completely a Western label and is actually not justified, except that they will, of course, acquire a monastic structure which did not exist in the Vedic world. But that apart, they were not actually in revolt against anything. They were simply departures, innovations, and the whole Indian intellectual tradition has always encouraged such and welcomed such departures and innovations. So in a sense, there was a lot of new thought and new methods, also new sometimes ethics, new injunctions to the lay population, and of course to the monastic orders. But in a sense, they belong to the same Vedic trunk, and they emerge from it. So this is another. The third, which I will mention briefly, is the caste system. Basically, one implicit message of current and past Indology is that the only way to understand India is through the prism of the caste system, and there cannot be any other method. And this vitiates the study of India because it dictates this concept of elitism or Brahminical domination. And you cannot look at any field without it. And it leads to absurd conclusions, some of which I challenge in my courses here at IIT Gandhinagar. For example, if you look at classical architecture or the classical arts of India, we are told that they are also elitist, they are Brahminical. But it is completely forgotten that there is a very considerable Marga Deshi dialogue, this classical and folk dialogue, and rich contributions from the folk element, the Deshi element. Not only that, you have lower classes and sometimes lower castes, like in the case of architecture, the Vishwakarmas, the builders, the artisans who are Shudras, all of them very richly contribute to those traditions, but that is not taken into account because it doesn't fit the dogma that we have to portray, those achievements of Indian civilization as basically elitist, including, education. Education was supposed to be elitist, even though the British themselves give us evidence from their own reports on village schools across India that they were Shudras. I'm quoting them, their own reports. There were actually a dominance of Shudra school-going children in the village schools, including some girls, not too many, but some. So we find when we observe closely that these stereotypes basically try to freeze India in a very rigid framework. And ultimately what it does is to treat it as a dead civilization. It wants to treat India, to study India as a dead object, just as you would study ancient Greece or ancient Egypt as a dead object. You can dissect the ancient Egyptian civilization. They will, and actually it is done much more respectfully, I would say, than often we see it done in the Indian context. And you find that India is not acknowledged to be a living civilization with a continuous connection to its past. And whether, whatever its achievements, accomplishments, bright spots, dark spots, merits or demerits. And of course, nobody is claiming that Indian civilization is a perfect thing. No civilization can ever be perfect because simply human beings are imperfect beings. So this is a given. But there is a failure of Indology to treat India as a living culture, and therefore with a certain respectful approach, or let us say a certain different kind of treatment that can account for all these living traditions. And this is one other implicit stereotype in the colonial baggage of Indology, which remains largely in operation today. This leads me to the second point, which is about power structures. You see, our whole debate would be fairly unnecessary if this was just a matter of a few harmless scholars sitting in some dusty departments of Western universities. It would not matter very much. We could just go on doing what we have to do. The problem is that there is a whole power structure built upon this Indology, and we see it manifested in a number of fields. I will just pick up a few practical quick examples given the paucity of time. The first is a tendency in the past 20 years to simply erase India. How is India erased? Very simply, by replacing the word India by the word South Asia, the phrase South Asia. So India disappears in the process, and I will give you one example in a minute where this was done vociferously. And it is a nice way, I would say, of blurring the concept, the very concept of Indian civilization. In fact, if you open a lot of very recent textbooks, studies about India, the phrase Indian civilization tends to disappear as a whole. And we simply hear about, some culture, some heritage, some traditions of South Asia. So the whole, context is blurred to begin with. We find this power structure in operation in the world of publication very strongly. The publishers, book publishers, the publishers of research journals are strongly impacted by this whole framework, which I have tried clumsily perhaps to describe. And you find that whoever does not fit, and again, it is not a question of, and the Greek scholar whose name was eluding me was Nicholas Kazanas. So whether Nicholas Kazanas, whether Karen Thompson, and many other who, have rejected this colonial interpretation in the case of the Rig Veda, they will be marginalized. They will not have access to these mainstream publications in the same way that those who still operate in the post-colonial but still colonial framework do. So I can give many examples, but I'll give only one. There was recently the most important book authored by Dr. Meenakshi Jain, the medieval historian, and the title of her book is Flight of Deities and the Rebirth of Temples. And I believe that this is a landmark book which will be spoken of in 20, 30, 40 years from now, because for the first time, it has collected a very wide array of evidence from archaeology, epigraphy, text, travelers, and so on, about what really happened in the wake of Islamic invasions of India. And this is a very simple historical problem. It should be simple. However, since the dominant framework has been to actually diminish considerably the record of these Islamic invasions of India, portray them in as much a favorable light as possible, portray the pre-Islamic Indian society is as much an unfavorable light as possible. Therefore, such a book will not find its way into the leading mainstream publishing houses. So, and it had to be published by a good but relatively minor publisher. Even though, to my mind, it is a work of superior scholarship compared to what it remains mainstream in terms of history of medieval India. So, there would be many other examples, but let me not continue. what dominates there is a kind of still crushing sense of superiority of the Western scholar. And recently, I cannot name him because this was a private remark to an Indian scholar, but a leading Western scholar in a leading US university point blank told this Indian scholar that, you know, it is we Western scholars who can really understand Indian civilization and Indian traditions. You Indians are in it and you cannot look at it objectively. You need to look at it from outside, and we are better equipped and we have the scientific methods to do so. So there is this innate, and I'm not saying that Western scholars cannot contribute. Once again, I repeat my caveat, they can and they must and they have contributed sometimes very important and brilliant studies, but we have to look at the framework. And this framework embeds this sense of superiority, which means that India must remain defined by Western scholarship. And that, of course, leads to a power structure. We saw it fully in operation in the recent controversy over California textbooks, where for quite a few years, and this is not quite over, I've not followed it very closely in the last 2-3 years, but you know that there was an attempt to author new textbooks on ancient history, where a certain number of dogmas, which are basically colonial dogmas, should be prominent. For example, that Aryans invaded India and from outside, etc., etc. Number two, that a woman in ancient India was oppressed and suppressed, and so on. And a number of Indians in the US organized themselves, unfortunately, into rather fragmented groups. But anyway, they put up a stiff legal opposition, which was partly successful, partly unsuccessful. What we saw, however, was an instant coalition of dozens and dozens of, leading academics from US universities, ready with massive petitions, with long documents, when you scrutinize them, were actually flawed at every single point. And I myself reviewed an argument on archaeology, the proto-historical archaeology of India, which was supposed to prove the coming of the Aryans, and did nothing of the sort because they misunderstood every single concept, even very basic, of Indian proto-historical archaeology. So very pathetic scholarship, in fact, yet being portrayed with the supreme authority of American tenured professors in American universities. So there you could see the full power structure in operation. And you can then understand that Indology becomes an ideological tool. It becomes a political tool. There is certainly an agenda there, which I may not try to define in fully, but which is, and you can see it again when, for example, let me, even if it may be a slightly controversial remark, but let us assume we have seen instances of right-wing Gundaism on certain campuses in India. Let us assume that. Immediately, you will see that within 3 days, 4 days, you will have petitions, and I'm referring to actual examples, of 700 Western academics. They include Indian names also, but they are based in Western universities, protesting against such a Gundaism. And it is good to protest against such a Gundaism, I fully agree. But I would say, why do you not also protest against another kind of, let us say, left-wing Gundaism, which is actually much older on Indian campuses, as we all know? And why do you only select one type and not the other? I would be for protesting against all Gundaism on Indian campuses, whether it is right-wing, left-wing, or nothing whatsoever. But if I voice this position, that let us protest against all kinds of Gundaism, I will be labeled right-wing. This is the irony of the whole political discourse of Indology today, and South Asian studies, in fact, as it is now called, because let us realize that we talk here in this event of Indology, but the term itself is regarded as obsolete in the West. It is South Asian studies, because keep in mind that the word India has to be discreetly removed from the scene. So let me now conclude with the third aspect, which is the problem in India. Because why is it that we should be worried at all about what, let us say, the Western scene might be? And why are we not able to construct this new Indology, which Dr. Sahasra Buddhaji and Dr. Sarat Deshpande have eloquently spoken of? Why have we not been able to do this? Why has India not been able to create its own vision of herself in its universities, schools to begin with? Well, it is a long, of course, problem, and I will just in summary say that our education system has remained colonized, and there has not been, after independence, any concerted effort to decolonize it, even though there were many pre-independence voices. Remember, Swami Vivekananda, Sri Aurobindo, Rabindranath Tagore, basically all the freedom fighters, Tilak, Gandhi, all of them called for a national education system after independence, and this was never done. There was not even any rethinking. It is only recently, in recent years, and actually this year, after more than 70 years of independence, that we are beginning to pose these questions. And we still do not have a very clear roadmap or very clear vision. At least we have some broad aspiration, and let us hope that this will find its way. But the point is that there has been, since independence, an institutional failure in India, both at school and university level, which is nothing but a failure of vision, which is nothing but the need to accept that we have to take it into our own hands to reinvestigate, revisit, and redefine India, not in a way that would attempt to glorify it. I'm personally strong opponent of any glorification. I would say that we need to have a very objective, honest, and level-headed investigation of what India has stood for. But I do believe that if we try, and a number of Indian intellectuals in their own way have tried to do it. For example, Sri Aurobindo tried to completely offer a fresh view of the Rig Veda. This is just one example where he left not only the Indian schools of Vedic interpretations, but also the European schools of interpretation, which were extremely dominant in his days. He left them behind and actually looked at the whole problem totally afresh. So there have been, in many other fields, there have been very sound Indian scholars trying to do this exercise of revisiting, redefining. But this has not penetrated deep into the mainstream. And you still find our departments of philosophy in India, starting from Western Greek, and European philosophy, and only incidentally coming to Indian philosophy. You find our departments of psychology still going by, Western psychology, and only accessorily mentioning yoga or methods of yoga, and so on and so forth. You find our departments of mathematics not teaching anything about Indian mathematics, for example, and so on and so forth. In conclusion, the problem is actually in India. You cannot hope that the West is going to alter its trajectory. It has its own motivations. And I would also apologize for using the term Western, which is a simplification, because the problem in Europe and the problem in the USA is a little bit different. Europe has its own traditions of Indology. The US is a more recent entrant into the field, and far more political, far more ideological than European scholars are. So my conclusion is that it is for India to realize that the world is going to turn more and more towards the enduring values that it has worked out, and the solutions it can offer to today's increasingly acute problems, especially problems of identity and multiculturalism. This is where India still has a lot to say, because it has worked on these problems for thousands of years. So it is only if we have this self-confidence of standing on our own legs that we can really contribute. Otherwise, we will remain second-hand, pale copies of Western scholarship. And some good work will be done here and there, no doubt. Punctually, a lot of good work is happening. But the overall framework, overarching framework, will remain what it is. So it is a long road ahead. It requires vision. It requires institutional support. It requires a lot of good scholars on board and sustained effort for years to come. Thank you very much.
And thank you, Michel, for this excellent speech and setting the ball rolling in the right direction, I should say, for which this webinar and this March seminar we talked about were planned. I think I should right now make some observations and some sort of wrapping up of 4 or 5 very important points which Michel Bhai has introduced in his speech. The first and the most important point that he mentioned was, and there I was reminded of a phrase that I think it is in William Halfpass's book. He says that it's an irony that India has to know itself through the Western eyes. So India cannot know itself. Indians cannot know their own past unless they follow the Western prism, for so to say. Now, ever since, I think I should also make one interesting observation that Bhandarkar Oriental Research Institute, when it came into existence, Bhandarkar himself gave an inaugural speech in which he has appealed the traditional Pandits to follow the Western critical and objective method of investigation. And he says that, and his remark was addressed to the traditional Naiyayiks. So I was really wondering that the effect of that advice given by Bhandarkar at the time of establishment of Bhandarkar Institute still persists. And we are so much, we means Indian Indologists are so much, influenced by the Western method for doing our own past. That is something that we have to really go. And that is what I was referring to, that if any discipline has to be live, if any discipline has to be relevant, it has to constantly, self-introspect about its own presuppositions and so on and so forth. Now, Michel Bhai has mentioned this point of stereotypification of Indian past, and he gave 3 very important examples. One is this myth of this horse and the horse-drawn chariot and etc. in the Rigveda. Then the myth that is that Buddhism and Jainism are the rebellious schools. And the third is this caste factor, or the myth of elitism, as he says. Now, these are typical stereotypes to which our understanding of our own heritage has been reduced to. So this is one part of this uneven playing ground. The second, and the result of this is that the living, as Michel Bhai very rightly pointed out, that Indian unlike the Greek and Egyptian civilizations, Indian civilization is still a living civilization, and therefore one cannot look at Indian past also as something which is dead. You see, a living organism cannot have one of its parts dead. It can't be. So that is one thing that he mentioned. Then another point Michel Bhai made was the power structure upon which a major part of Indology is built. And there in that context, he mentioned another important thing. I have also written on that, namely replacement of the word India by South Asia. I mean, it's not, I think it has its roots in this American sociological studies, where they have first introduced the term area studies. So India, then Indian subcontinent becomes an area. And once you say it is an area study, it means that the knowledge traditions of that region are restricted to that area only. So that is how it boils down to. So this replacement of the word India, I mean, that is actually erasing of the identity of India as India. If we replace it by the term South Asia or South Asian studies or area studies and so on and so forth. And then with associated with all this, there is a sense of superiority, the sense of power and so on and so forth. So all these things have to be taken note of for any Indologist, whether that Indologist is a trained Indologist or even an amateur Indologist and so on and so forth. And going back to, and coming to new Indology, Michel Bhai referred to the lack of self-awareness as far as Indian education system is concerned. And this education system is largely, even to date, it is largely based on colonial mindset, which I think is something where we have to work, not only for Indology, but for other humanistic disciplines also. So, so many points have been covered by Professor Danino's wonderful presentation. And now I thank him, first of all, for giving this presentation. And now we turn to Dr. Jaideep Bagchi's presentation, which is titled as Prolegomena to any future metaphysics. Any future Indology. I'm sorry, I am a philosopher, and philosophy students all over the world are familiar with this phrase, Prolegomena to any future metaphysics, and it was by Kant. So it was a slip of tongue, but all right. So now I invite Dr. Jaideep Bagchi. Jaideep Bagchi, as is known, he is known along with his teacher Vishwa Adluri for a book called the Nay Science, a history of German Indology. Now, this book has created, so to say, tremors in the Western Indological campuses. And as far as I know, I have read quite a bit of that book, and I am also familiar with all the controversies it has generated, good, bad, whatever. But I think this book has to be taken very seriously by the proponents and also the opponents of what Adluri and Bagchi are saying. So actually it's a challenge, and I very much wish that this book is really read and discussed and commented upon amongst the Indologists in India very seriously. Jaideep teaches, he is a Berlin-based philosopher and a writer. He has a PhD in philosophy from the New School for Social Research in New York. And along with his teacher, Professor Vishwa Adluri, who teaches in Hunter College, New York, he is the author of the Nay Science, A History of German Indology, which was published in 2014, and many other books. Now, today he will be speaking upon, with reference to Suktankar's edition of Mahabharata. Thank you. Over to Jaideep.
Thank you. Can you all hear me? Hello?
Yeah,
hear me?
yeah, yes.
Okay,
yes.
Wonderful. And I'm trying to share. Can someone, I've also sent my PowerPoint to Archana Sharma. Okay, I'm the presenter. I should be able to share now. Let me try share. I'm not able to share. Is the webmaster there? Or Archana Sharma? Could you share my PowerPoint, the one I sent this morning?
Hello, sir, but I have not received your PPT.
I sent it by Dropbox. I sent you a link.
I am
Let me try and
sir.
share. Okay, let me try and share. Will be able to record. Okay, it's asking me to restart WebEx, so I'll be back in 2 seconds. It will come back with the share function.
I
Okay.
मी सुद्धा पाठवलंय माझा पॉवर पॉईंट तुम्हाला मिळाला का नाही मी पाठवलेला पॉवर पॉईंट मिळाला की नाही देशपांडे
I'm able to share now. Hello? Hello?
Yes, please go ahead.
Okay, I'm able to share. Thank you.
Yes, yes.
Okay, great. Excellent. So it just needed a quick restart to do that. So good morning, everyone. Namaste. I'm very honored to be here. I'm very grateful to Professor Sharad Deshpande for inviting me. Like him, I'm a philosopher. My teacher, Vishwa Adluri, is a philosopher. And it wasn't a slip of the tongue. It was quite correct that the title is a reference to Kant's Prolegomena to any future metaphysics. And just as Kant's project is to provide a critical grounding for metaphysics and to restrict metaphysics as this bad connotation for him, where it is supernatural and it is talking about things that human intellect cannot know. In this title, also, Indology is a hidden metaphysics as it has been practiced for the last 200 years. And there's that concealed metaphysics and a concealed theology, and it is claiming to talk about things it cannot know. The histories it constructs are things that cannot be empirically known. So the project of the Science was to expose this hidden metaphysics underlying Indology and to show that it is not a science and it is not a critical enterprise in a Kantian sense. That by way of introduction. I want to thank Professor Vinay Sahasrabudhe for organizing this, because indeed it has been 200 years, more than 200 years now. 2018 would have been exactly 200 years of the founding of the first Indological chair in Germany, which was Schlegel's chair for literature at the University of Bonn. It is not possible, it is not conceivable that a science or a discipline does not need to revisit its beginnings after 200 years. It is not conceivable that a science does not advance or ask certain questions about itself, provided it is genuinely science. In fact, the more it is a science, the faster this process, as we all know, happens. The greater the revisions that happen, the revisions within a science are not signs of its decrepitude, but of its strength, of its actual vitality, its relevance. And it has been 200 years. No one has revisited the question of what makes Indology a science. Why is Indology considered part of the humanities? Why should it be paid for and conducted at universities? Whom does it benefit? All these questions have not been asked for 200 years. And we've been stuck in sort of a colonial mindset, but also a patronage culture, where Indologists simply did something, no one asked these questions, and they were patronized first by the German state and later, as we will see, by the Indian state itself. So, in this relationship of patronage, a kind of courtier like dependence evolved. And the project, one of the projects of the Science and the next book, which is coming out after the Science that Vishwa and I are currently working on, will be to ask about this patronage system, this courtier culture that is at the heart of Indology today. That by way of introduction, I'm going to go into my PowerPoint very quickly and go through it fairly rapidly. All questions I will take at the end. It's a very simple, straightforward, direct PowerPoint, and it will make some big claims, but you should know that this is based upon 15 years of joint research by two scholars. So all the work has been done, all the publications have been published with publishers. science from OUP, philology and criticism with Anthem, other journal articles. Most of them are on academia, and I will give you the link at the end of this talk so you can go look it up. So please bear with me if I cannot sort of stuff the PowerPoint full with facts and names and details, but believe me, it is all there. Before I begin, I want to salute the tradition, the lineage of gurus, and I want to especially salute Vishwa Adluri, who could not be with us today, who is my teacher and my guru. So with those words, let me begin. So you're all able to see this PowerPoint? Okay, so let me start with a simple, since we've been talking about Bhandarkar as someone who sort of instructed the Shastris to westernize, I believe we're actually referring to the same speech. This is his talk, The Critical, Comparative and Historical Method. And that ends, that entire essay that he published, ends with some very striking advice. Let us, sitting at the feet of the English, French, and German rishis, imbibe the knowledge that they have to give. Let us learn. Let us reform. Strong words, right? We consider rishis a very select club. I don't think any contemporary Indian has been raised to that status, or 200 years ago, any Indian could claim that status. But en masse, he is elevating, not selectively X is a rishi or Y is a rishi, but English, French, and German rishis, Westerners en masse who study India, are raised to the status of rishis. Continuing. Then he comes up with the notion of degeneracy. The English placed before the Indian Aryas the highest civilization which Europe had reached, but the Indian Aryas had grown so degenerate that it produced no influence whatever on them, and their degeneracy deepening, they eventually became hewers of wood and drawers of water, or were swept off the face of the earth by the inexorable law of the survival of the fittest. So Hinduism, or India, if it does not appropriate from the West, does not, at the feet of these rishis, learn from them, it risks enhancing its degeneracy. It has already become degenerate, and the hope for it, the hope for restitution and reform, comes from the West. This is Bhandarkar, but it is also in keeping with the long line of Western thinking about India. And here I've cited a very recent quote, 1996, from Heinrich von Stiekenkron, and you will see why it is Stiekenkron, by the way, that is IE, not EI, in his name. Why it has to be Heinrich von Stiekenkron will become apparent in a bit. Here is Stiekenkron speaking about traditional Indian commentaries. Now look at the accusation. They harmonized and freely downplayed all breaks in the text. Above all, they sought to read their own philosophical theological concepts out of individual textual passages in order to secure Krishna's divine authority for them. So Indian commentators are not critical. They're not able to see the breaks in the text. They're literally blind to the breaks in the text. They are motivated. They are only interested in shoehorning their own concepts into the text. They lack neutrality. They lack objectivity. And of course, they're dogmatic and religious, because this is all about a Brahmanical seizing of authority and claiming Krishna as their god, or elevating Krishna over other gods. Contrast that now with the last line, what he says, or rather with the first line of what he says. The analytic thinking of Western interpreters who were schooled in historical philological methods stands in contrast. So the Western interpreter contrasts with this tendentious, non-objective approach that Indians have developed. And Western interpreters will apply historical philological methods, identify these breaks and contrasts, eliminate the issue of Krishna, eliminate the issue of his divinity, and give you objective factual knowledge about the text. That is the proposition that Bhandarkar is, in a way, obviously anachronistically, but Bhandarkar is conveying the same notion when he's speaking to the Shastris and the Pandits of what they have to do. We are then facing a situation, if this is the sort of Bhandarkar writing in about 1886 or 1889 was his text, Stiekenkron 100 years later, 1996, an Indian and a Western, we are facing, these two people frame a situation that can only be called the inhumanities, because Hinduism has been interpreted according to a doctrine of degeneracy in ancient times. In contemporary times, it is interpreted as nationalism. In both instances, only a Western scholar, or one who has been trained by a Western scholar, can be trusted. This kind of exclusion, elimination of a vast proportion of humanity, not granting it the ability to interpret its texts, not granting it the ability to carry self conscious, self aware research, not granting it even the ability to know what is in its text, but to say they're all blind, they're all corrupt, they're all reading things into the text. This is inhumanity. It is unsustainable. There is no discipline I know of in which this can be done today. You cannot go in African studies or race studies and say all of Black Africa doesn't know what African culture is. It could not be done. The racism would be apparent. It is only in India, and Michel Danino gave us a quote, an example of that. It is only in India that this racism is still possible, where you go and say, no Indian knows what is in the Mahabharata or the Ramayana. We Western scholars will tell you, and let us tell you, and pay us. Don't forget, this is also a lot about funding. Pay us so that we can tell you your text back to you. It is unheard of. Okay, this cannot continue. If you are to bring back, if we collectively are to bring back Indian thought as a part of the humanities, we have to address the inhumanity at the heart of Indology at present. That was the project of the Nay Science. Obviously, the book is pointing out the inhumanity. It's not a science. It is not part of the Geisteswissenschaften, which are the humanities. So not scientific in the sense of natural science, but also not scientific in the sense of the human or the social sciences. These are 6 claims that Western Indology has made, and they have always been set up as binary contrasts. Western Indology is scientific, Indian commentators are unscientific. I showed you the proof for that with the Stekencron quote. Western Indology is based on method. Remember, Stekencron said Western interpreters using historical philological methods. Indians did not have this method or had to learn from Western. I won't read all of them because we will keep coming up against them individually. These are sort of the 6 claims that have to be addressed if we are to critically reevaluate Indology. Western Indology is scientific. What method does it use? It uses the text historical method. German scholars produce critical editions. They gave us scientific, historical, factual accounts of the Mahabharata, for example, that it was not this great, big, earth-shaking conflict, but a much smaller conflict between regional kingdoms. Perhaps it was the Aryan-Dravidian Ur conflict in Indian history when the Aryans invaded. Perhaps that's the core of the Mahabharata. That's the historical portion. And everything else about deities, divinities, cosmology, ritual, all that was added later. This is the allegedly scientific historical now. And then, of course, higher criticism to determine what is relevant to the Mahabharata, what is originally part of this small epic tale, what does not belong to it. None of these stand. The reason they do not stand is because in 200 years, they could not identify one single independently verifiable objective proposition about the Mahabharata. This was an exercise in subjectivity and an exercise in prejudice. The fact that they did it collectively, you were institutionally accredited and became a member of the club, does not make it a science. So we will come up with those issues, but I want to stress on point E. If Indology calls itself the science of India, it must first provide a definition of science, and then it must restate and legitimate 200 years of Western scholarship and show how much of it was actually scientific. These are the two tests without which Western Indology remains a nay science. This is not to deny they may have had an interest in India. This is not to deny they might have compiled dictionaries or created certain amounts of work. Obviously, even a pseudoscience can be highly productive, as we all know from reading Foucault. But the question remains. If it is a science, we need a definition, and then we need a clarification and restatement of what makes it scientific. Western Indology is based on method. This was the second proposition we saw from Stekencron. Incorrect, because no 2 Western scholars could agree on criteria, conclusions, or even how the method was to be applied. The only agreement was Indian texts are not authentic. They are not organic. And we have to identify the Ur text. The German scholars will identify the primordial text, which is the primordial form of Aryan religious worship, of Aryan civilization, and everything after that was degeneracy and accretion to this original core. That was sort of the base requirement to enter Indology. And if you participated in that, you would be institutionally accepted. If you questioned this founding proposition of Indology and said, let's read the text we have, you were not welcome within Indology. I won't read point C because we're going to see some examples in a bit. This is a table. This is extracted from a new article that Vishwa and I published from Brill in Leiden. It is in the Handbook of Hinduism in Europe. And the article is called German Indology and Hinduism. On the left, you see a column with some names and the dates in which they wrote their articles or books on the Bhagavad Gita. And in the center, you see their claim about what was the original Bhagavad Gita, what criterion they applied. And then on the rightmost column, you see the verses they retained out of 700. Sort of in the standard edition of the Bhagavad Gita, it has 700 verses. Holtzman Jr. says, only the pantheistic elements are original. The original Aryans were pantheists. I will remove everything that does not fit my criterion or I think doesn't fit my criterion. He ends up with 164 verses. What is scientific about this? I'm not going to go down the column. I invite you all to download and read the article. It's available for free. I'll give you the link if you want. This is not a science. If everyone gets together and has an opinion about a text and removes passages from the text and ends up with a truncated text of 85 verses or 71 verses, that is not science. Now, this one table gives the lie to Stephen Cron's statement. Because remember, he said Indian commentators are subjective. They freely harmonized. Is this not subjective? Are they not freely picking and choosing what they want of the text? There is no agreement. There is no method. But we were told Western scholars have a historical philological method. They are trained in this. The training has led to radically incoherent results, more incoherence than a tradition of commentators who accepted the basic text and were giving you profound interpretations relative to their time and their context. This is a longer version of the same table, so we shall skip it. You will see, I just put it in there to show you how random the deletions were. Any verse they didn't like or they had some quibble with, they pulled out. And there was simply no consistency in the method. And the proportions, verses retained, as you see at the bottom, the proportions they retained were so disparate that it cannot be considered a science if everyone comes out with a different measurement at the end. Now, the third point, Western Indology is free of religious and nationalistic prejudices. Indians, as we know, are parochial. They're nationalistic. They sort of worship Hindu nationalism. They foment religious conflict and violence. We need the cooling hand of a Western scholar and Indologist to sort of calm the waters and say, let us have objective science here. I will provide a science. I will provide authoritative facts about the past. This does not happen because the Western Indologists as a whole, I'm speaking here as a group, were also playing for power and were also deeply invested in religious conflicts and national projects within their home cultures. So point A, the Indologist arguments are based on explicitly racial or racist, anti-Semitic and Christian evangelical agendas. This cannot be forgotten. Nationalist anxieties and a search for racial prestige fueled their interest in India. The whole Aryan issue was nothing but the search for German racial prestige, and this has been documented in countless studies. It does not need me to establish this. Their narrative legitimated racism and genocide, racism towards the Indians, but also racism within Europe, anti-Semitism, and ultimately, as we all know, a genocide. Meanwhile, and this is where it gets interesting, meanwhile, this expertise, who would want such a science? A state that was looking to establish a nationalist project, a state that was looking to expand, a state that was looking to exclude Jews from public life, could find it very useful to purchase chairs at which the science would be provided. So the science that enabled National Socialism precedes National Socialism by a good 50 years. And for those 50 years, it is successively selling itself to German governments. And the one thing Indologists are concerned with in Germany at this point is securing their own expansion. They are really not concerned with the long-term effects of their scholarship or the harm it is doing or the direction Germany is going in. As long as the regime will buy their scholarship, they're on an expansionist course. This is a famous quote by Solomon Schechter, who came from Romania, and he describes the higher criticism of the Indologists as higher anti-Semitism. This is Luther on the left, obviously, not Schechter, but you will see in a minute why Luther is relevant here. There is a long tradition of anti-Judaism prevalent in Europe and also specifically in Germany. This is not something new with Protestantism. The Catholics had enough problems with the Jews. But it is only after Protestantism and after Luther that German anti-Judaism takes on a peculiar and a very dangerous dark tone. And the culmination of that anti-Judaism is racial anti-Semitism, and one of its side branches is the philology of higher criticism, which is to remove everything Jewish or perceived to be Jewish from originally from the Hebrew Bible, the Old Testament. Luther lectured something like, forget the exact figure, something like 14 or 20 times on the Old Testament, but only 4 times on the New Testament. He was obsessed with the Old Testament and purging it of this Jewish element, and high criticism continues that project. I won't read the quote, I want to read this next quote instead. This is actually Luther from a pamphlet he published. Here in Wittenberg, on our parish church, there is a sow carved in stone. Under her, young piglets and Jews lie sucking. Behind the sow stands a rabbi. You can see the rabbi is lifting the sow's tail up and peering into her anus. And this is an image that actually is on the Wittenberg church. It is called Judensau. It is a standard feature of many German churches prior to the Reformation. Luther appropriates it for his pamphlet. The interpretation he gives it is new. Previously, it was simply to mock the Jews, but he gives it a new interpretation and claims inside the rabbi is looking at the Talmud, as if he wanted to read and see something difficult and special. This is most likely where they got their Shem Hamphoras from. Shem Hamphoras is the ineffable name of God, of Yahweh. This is new. This has not been done before. This delegitimation of a textual tradition, and to say the Jews have no knowledge, they're making up their knowledge of the Talmud. We don't even have to have a debate with them. Remember that Christianity exists as an intertextual debate. It's a debate between readers of the New Testament who are also readers of the Old Testament and people who just read the Old Testament. If you only read the Old Testament, the Hebrew Bible, you would be Jewish. If you see the Hebrew Bible as radically incomplete and pointing to its fulfillment, and you see the New Testament as fulfilling it, then you are Christian, but then you have to always also read the Hebrew Bible, because without the Old Testament, there is no prophecy. And Jesus cannot be the Messiah announced in the Old Testament without an Old Testament. Christianity exists as this debate. Remember, Stephen Cron said, we don't interpret, we don't debate. He's out to lunch, because Christianity does nothing but have a textual debate. And for the first time, you have someone saying, we don't need to have this debate because their entire knowledge of text comes out of the anus of a sow. Now, you're wondering, what is the relevance of anti-Semitism or Luther to Indology? Think about some of the things you've heard today. Indology has not unfolded as a debate between Indians and Germans. Let us even say the Germans were Christians and they were colonizers. They did not sit down and engage and say, look, explain your text to us. Talk to us about the commentarial tradition. Read the commentaries with us. We might have some questions. Stephen Cron gave you that grand gesture of saying, no commentaries. Throw them aside. We have replaced them with scientific method. The roots of this dismissal of an entire intellectual tradition, of an entire commentarial tradition, have to be sought for far back. I don't think Stephen Cron is aware of the sources of his gesture. As a rule, German Indologists are not aware of their historical background. So, these issues survive even today, as I pointed out. I'll let you read these points and sort of internalize them. I don't want to read them out, but note the third and fourth point. Because for the third point, I want to show you actually a clip that's coming up. And it's by Jürgen Haneda at Marbooks. I want to actually address that clip. And then the fourth point, race baiting. I know many of you are scholars on Bharatiya Vidva Parishad, and you know the kind of race baiting that goes on. This race baiting is a kind of frustrated anti-Semitism. It is, in my view, a displaced anti-Semitism, because after the Holocaust and World War II, the kind of Jew baiting that used to go on in German university campuses, on which I've actually translated an entire book that is coming out, that is no longer permissible or possible anymore. And the same people then look for these lists and forums and continue that as race baiting. And that is why you have so much of it going on. Its root is not specifically Indian. Its root, I believe, is a kind of frustrated, displaced anti-Semitism. All right, so to the quote I promised you. The Pandit's proficiency in a subject is often coupled with a certain way of life, and it may be difficult to divorce the academic aspect from the Pandit identity. Remember, right in the beginning, Bhandarkar had told the Pandits, abandon your Pandithood and go into critical scholarship. 100 years later, the same message is being given to them. Since he is supposed not only to function as a mere scholar, his view of the culture he embodies through his erudition is necessarily more holistic. Western Indology with its blah, 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 we've heard that over and over, historically oriented critical approach, had to make use of the Indian Pandita in order to get as much as possible first-hand information, but it could not accept its theological dimension without compromising its aims as a historical subject. Let's translate this statement into physical terms. I had to make use of the Dalit sharecropper as much as possible to extract the fruits of his production. I'm deliberately using Marxist terminology. To extract the fruit of his labor and appropriate it. Once I put it in those physical terms, you will see how horrific this statement is. It is not acceptable to extract the living elements of a culture, that which an entire group depends on for its livelihood, and to justify it in racist terms and say, we are superior, we are more critical, you people are embedded in your culture, give your books over to us. It is not acceptable. The image, Sharaji, is Jürgen Haneda at the University of Marburg. And the specific place, I'm glad you asked where the image is from. He's professor of Indology at Marburg. The specific place he's speaking at, the event he's speaking at, is an event hosted by the Consulate General of Frankfurt. So you see the irony. He didn't say this, this was not part of his lecture then, but this was a book he published. So clearly they could have done due diligence and said, excuse me, do we really want to invite this person? But he got invited, he got funded. But I have put this statement because it might be hard to grasp abstract terms. I've put it consciously in terms of extracting the labor of a Dalit sharecropper to show you this is still colonization. It is exploitation. It is racism. It is degradation. And it continues and is funded and is done with the approval of the Consulate General of India. Words fail me. All right. We can ignore his justification for why you exploit someone. There were also justifications for why you needed to have a Holocaust or eliminate the Jews. There are always justifications. Professors at university have never been short of justifications, of disciplines, of sciences that legitimate unethical practices. All right. Let's come to the fifth point. Western Indology is historical and based in history. This point is also false. A, Western Indologists did not know their own history. They did not know European history. The historical reconstructions were based on the Aryan, non-Aryan Brahmanic periodization. And a famous example, if you want to have sources, Vishwa and I are working on a book on the history of Aryan hypothesis. All the readings collected. The best example is to go to the Nazi Indologist from Vienna, Erich Frauwallner. So he claims that philosophy, science, mathematics, rationality, all intellectual achievements from the Indian subcontinent were Aryan. And there was an Aryan period in Indian history when all this flourished and developed. And then you have the non-Aryan period, which does not have any of this. This is a racial hypothesis. And it's racial not just in the sense that it is saying there are people who are fairer or blonder or whatever, and there are people who are darker from India, but it is making a claim about their intellectual capacity based on their racial or their phenotypical features. This is the most extreme and virulent form of racism. And it has underlain a lot of attempts to periodize, provide chronologies of India. Many historical accounts are simply replicas of this a priori scheme. If you've read the first few chapters of the Ney Science, you know over and over this scheme crops up, and their history was teleological. It consisted of a period of supremacy followed by racial degeneracy that led to Hinduism, which is polytheistic and pantheistic, and finally the advent of critical Western scholarship to reform and restore India. This has been done. The last bit in the cursive script. This they did to secure. Thus did they secure Indian government funds. Remember that the Indian government also had a colonial hangover for many years and felt for India to achieve former greatness, it had to be reformed. And here were the people giving you a diagnosis, right? If you say this person is unwell, this person is sick, then the first person you get in is the doctor and say, this is the problem. This is the medicine. This is the cure. And these people came. They were quacks, but they came with a nicely packed medical toolkit to India and sort of laid out their quackery and said, this is what is need to be done. So let me actually show you. I will show you a sort of interesting slide in a bit of how that was achieved. But let's now move to point 5. Am I wrong in being so strident? Am I being too strident and saying there is a problem with this kind of institutional setup because did not Indologists carry knowledge of India to the West? How many people in the West appreciate India? Yoga clubs, Indian restaurants have done more for the appreciation of Indian culture abroad than Indologists have. Each department has maybe 5 Sanskritists or 5 PhD students. Indian culture reached the West through channels of mass communication. It reached the West through Indians traveling. It reached the West through the Vedanta institutes. It reached the West through Vivekananda. These were the real things that should have been funded. It reached the West through Indians going abroad and talking about their culture and organizing events, cultural events in the schools of their children. What has Indology then functioned as? First, as jobs for the boys. What has happened, what we have institutionalized is not Indian culture. It has not been the expansion of Indian knowledge abroad, but an institutional system of bartering positions. You invite my person, my student here, I invite you back to Germany for a summer. This kind of barter system has been established. In German, there's a wonderful word for this called Kuhhandel, trading with cows. And that's what has been, these Brahmins have each been trading their cows back and forth across the Indian Ocean. So, some examples, Walter Sly and Jürgen Haneda mutually publishing each other's work. Where is peer review? Where is the system of double-blind peer review? Why are they not going to independent publishers and having their work objectively reviewed? Instead, they're using departmental money or Indian government money to publish each other's work. Haneda published a book in Pune International Series. The editors were Pune scholars. I met one of them, Bahulkar, at a conference in Dubrovnik. I said, why did you publish that book? It is awful. It is one of the worst books ever written. It's simply a collection of essays, side swipes, inane ramblings. He denied it. He said, I think it's a good book. That book came out and the reviews came out, and you should see the reviews. I will share the link with you to see the reviews. This system of barter has broken down even in the West. It was fine as long as all these books existed only in libraries and you had to be institutional members to go into libraries, and so the books could not reach outside. So it was like the Catholic Church. You know, the dogma, the doctrines were created for internal consumption and were preserved. Once you have publishing or once you have internet and everyone can read and critique and give their opinions, that system breaks down. All right, I won't read point B. I'm sure you've seen that point. Let me now go towards the end of the presentation. Sharaji, can I just get a time check from you? Okay, so let's look at ethics. The degradation of a culture under colonialism, its dispossession and the co-optation of its text is painful enough. But this episteme on the right, you see Jakob Wilhelm Hauer, a Nazi Indologist. He's not the only one. I recently exposed Paul Hacker, and now I'm working on Paul Thiemer, where the materials that say he was absorbed into the Waffen-SS, and there's some further research I'm working on. Let me end with one dramatic slide. I know there are more points we could discuss, but I want to stick very strictly within the time. And for this, I need to go into full screen view. This is Stephen Crown, with whom I began the presentation. On the right, you see the president or ex-president of India, Pranab Mukherjee, and he is handing the Distinguished Indologist Award, $20,000, to Stephen Crown on the left. You saw Stephen Crown's opinion of the Indian commentarial tradition and his claim that Western historical scholarship must replace it. He has also elsewhere said there's no such thing as Hinduism, that doesn't exist, etc., etc. Be that as it may, what is the underlying narrative that legitimates this kind of transfer of authority and transfer of wealth from a colonized country to what is in fact a wealthy country? What is the underlying logic that enables both people to act in this way? It is simply a narrative of history. That narrative of history says that there is an advance from previous cultures to Stephen Crown, the modern European culture. And therefore, those who are further back on this scale have to be grateful that Stephen Crown deigns to recognize them. Let's lift the curtain on this narrative. This is the narrative of history, the historical science of the evolution of man that Indologists have been working out, beginning with the racial theories of Friedrich Schlegel and August Wilhelm Schlegel. Vishwa and I wrote an entire 30-page essay on this. Racial interests were not far from Indology. In fact, Indology is the evolution of race science, moving from the anthropological or the paleographic and the word is escaping me, from the physical level, moving to the level of intellectual classification, taxonomy of intellectual cultures. It is a taxonomic project of assigning cultures their place within human history and within human development, and affirming the scholar who carries out this dissection, the scholar who carries out this classification, affirming him as the end process, the goal of that teleological process, and that is what legitimates Indology. I will end there. That was exactly half of my presentation, but I want to be strict within time. There's a lot we could discuss about Suktankar and the alternatives. I'm sorry, let us not end there. Let me end with the end slide, because this is important. I promised you a future for Indology. Suktankar actually achieves that future. He turns Indology around in the West. He learns Western methods of editing text. He appropriates it. He defends the classical tradition. He defends the Mahabharata. He teaches a generation of scholars. He mocks the Western savants and starts the Mahabharata Critical Edition project. He is the true person we should celebrate at the Bhandarkar Oriental Institute, not R.G. Bhandarkar. And this is the future for Indology. A, become critical. B, understand the background of Christianity, historicism, racism, how they work together. End the institutional privileges. There is no need for ICCR or any other body to fund people at Heidelberg when there are so many excellent scholars doing excellent work outside of this tendentious institutional system. The hiring of one's peers, etc., has to stop. Independent critical review, distinguish hagiographies from critical studies. So stop writing hagiographies of German scholars such as Bühler, etc. Write critical scholarship. Indians must stop profiting from these easy contrasts. And so this point 6 was an accusation at Romila Thapar. I was looking at some of her work. She is one of those I find who has profited greatly from this narrative of the critical Westerner or the representative of Western tradition in India and the uncritical Indian masses, and she has profited greatly from that. 7, I will not read out. If you have questions, you can come back to it. But on 8, let me address it, since a few people raised it a few times with the issue of petitioning. Has a single Western, Sharaji, this is my final point, so I will end on time. Has any petition signed by 700, or let us say 7,000 Western academics ever changed political reality on the ground in India? No, it has not. Neither one way nor the other way. So what are these exercises in petitioning which have no effect and no purpose? There are ways you confirm your membership in the club. There are ways you create a group think. There are ways, this is a token academics give to each other to say, we recognize you, that you are on our side and you're one of us. The price paid for these academic interventions is never the academic sitting secure at Columbia or Chicago. There will be a riot in India, some minorities might be killed, or there might be some violence or some looting in India. This kind of firebrand, starting fires, this throwing of Molotov cocktails into a seething mass has to stop. Academics who do this are utterly unconscionable. They are utterly shameless because I put Lane in there as an example. We know that the Bhandarkar Institute was attacked after his book was published. He rode the gravy train of controversy and it made his career in the West. The price was potentially paid. In the end, the manuscripts were not harmed. The former secretary told me, look, they just sort of tried to intimidate, but if they had really wanted to destroy it, one match would have burned down the whole place. And so we know they really didn't want to destroy the match. But potentially, for the sake of a petty little academic career, this man risked India's entire manuscript heritage, a very large portion of it being put to the fire. These are the academics we are dealing with. It must stop. Thank you. All right, I shall end the share.
Yeah. Thank you. Am I audible to everyone? Jaideep, am I audible?
Yes, you are, Shanuji.
Yeah. Okay, thank you, Jaideep, for this very, I should say, forthright and at times very scathing, so to say, attack, I should say, on the hidden, I'm not getting the proper word on the hidden agendas of the Indology. And I must appreciate one remark of yours, and I think that is the key to understand this whole project of future Indology, and that is Indology did not emerge as a dialogue between the West and the East. That is important. Indology emerged as denying the rationality of the Indians. It emerged by denying the dialogue tradition of the India. It emerged out of the denial of the live and thoroughly engaging scholarship, long scholarship of theories and worldviews, and relegating that whole realm of knowledge into myth, into the superstition, and into religion. That is one thing. So this point, I think, is the stem from which your entire argument, not only in this presentation, but also in the book, Nay Science, is there. The second point that you made was the roots of Indology, with which or by which the Indians were dazzled so much. That the roots of that Indology has a long history of European, Christianity and Judaism and the whole racial understanding. So that is the hidden part of Indology. And what comes on the fore is the scholarship part of it. And as if who told our forefathers that we did not have critical and historical methods? Who told our forefathers that India lacked this methodology? Even if we just cursorily look at the long debates between the Naiyayikas and the Vedantins, for instance, or between the Buddhist logicians and the Naiyayikas, we'll find that this is far more better and richer philosophical and intellectual engagement. But that I don't know why, under the colonial mindset, I often talk about it, the colonial mindset made us believe that this is not so. We did not have these, and we simply forgot these long traditions of critical engagement with one another. Also, the pluralism, the pluralistic universe that India always had, the six darshanas, they represent what else could there be which is not as pluralistic as these six systems of thought are concerned. Uh, now in your presentation you gave those six, you examined these six claims made by the Western Indologists that it is scientific, it is based on method, it is this, it is that, and you have exposed the falsity of all such claims. I think in India, as far as I know, and my engage, I mean, I'm also not a formal Indologist, but I can claim some affinity with Indology in the sense that I did some amount of Indian philosophy, and when I was writing my PhD dissertation on Gaudapad, and when I was looking for writings, I found most of that writing was Indological, and the issues were whether Gaudapad was one person or it's a tribe name, where what was his period, and what is the lineage, and in that lineage all these are these mythical figures or not. So the whole entire I mean very sheer epistemological issues were reduced to myth. So, so I thought that if this is the kind of Indology we have, then it's better we don't have it. But then later on, I realized that this is how the most of the Indologists in India are working. They are not going beyond the popular popular narrative that Indology deals with something which is long dead. Indology deals something which is not living, and basically it is the science of myth, if I may put that way. Now it has to come out of this, and then as you know, we have to be. And then I find two types of Indologists in India. One, those who are those who are working out, so to say, the empirical issues, that the deciding the date, deciding the place, deciding this, deciding that, and so on. And most of them are simply unaware of these theoretical issues which govern, which are about the discipline of Indology as such. So that we have to, and what we do and how it is received in the West. These are very important issues, and I think if your presentation has triggered some of those ideas in the minds of the viewers, I think that's a great success. And once again I say that, and this point I think it goes back to what Michel Danino referred to. In fact, Michel and yourself, both of you have made many political points. I mean, many political, or which points which have lots of political dimensions. Yes, Indology is a political discipline in the sense that how you construct your past and how you understand your past is something, and both of you have referred to power and so on and so forth. That's one thing. And I think your book, really, I very much wish that there should be a workshop on for studying the Ney science very critically. Of course, not following the critical and historical method in vogue, but critically in our own way. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Sharatji. We have to talk because I adore Gaudapada, and my introduction to philosophy was through the Upanishads and Mandukya and through his commentary on it. So it would be. Let me just add one thing. You said you're not an Indologist. I want to say that every Indian is an Indologist, because if we define the term Indology or Indologist as someone who gives an account of India, a logos of India, then by definition, every Indian has the right, maybe even a duty, to define himself and his culture.
I agree.
And must have that freedom to do it. And therefore, the fact that Indology has become a restrictive term where you have to get a degree from Göttingen or from Tübingen to speak about India is false. If I go on the street and meet a rickshawala, for me, he is an Indologist and a better one than in Marburg, because he can give me something more authentic about the culture than these people. So from today, everyone, I'm giving you degrees in Indologist, just as Dayanand Saraswati gave away the sacred thread. I'm giving away degrees in Indologist and saying you're all Indologists. All right, questions.
Okay. Well, I think we are quite in time, and it's 5 o'clock. And are there any questions? The host, are you getting any questions?
No, sir, not at this moment, sir.
No, not at this moment.
No, sir, none.
No. Okay. Well, then we have kept a slot for this question answer session. But if sometimes people get inspiration to ask the questions a little later, so we may be expecting some questions, and certainly I am sure that there will be a lot of questions, and we can. I think I suggest this to Vediji. That these lectures recordings should be available in your archives, so that anyone can listen to them and get in touch with these speakers and raise questions and get clarifications from them separately. So with this, I think we can conclude today's session, 2 lectures, and which were extremely fruitful.
Sharatji, there are many questions that they've typed into the question and answer window.
Oh, but I don't see.
Sir, it might be in your personal chat box if you can read out, because then it might not be coming to us.
Okay, so Indrani Ramprasad says, thanks to ICCR for this long overdue move to reclaim India's identity and indigenous knowledge base. What would you recommend for a short and long-term program for the Indian Academy to institute a new Indology? So I don't know if that's a question for me or for the ICCR people. It is obviously something we have to work on. I mean, there needs to be a short and long-term program for the Indian Academy that it sort of completely rethinks how to do Indology in the future. Let this conference be a historic moment. Let it be like Vivekananda's great speech at Chicago, which, let it be a moment when we say we have to do this. It's not a one-off thing, and let us evolve a program to do it. And that new Indology, I think it's a great term. It's an outstanding term. New Indology as the antidote to the old, as relevant to its time, and addressing the fact, look, in 200 years, the world has changed. When my grandmother was alive, England was a paramount power. She was born in 1911. It was entirely a British-speaking culture that she grew up in. By the time she died 93 years later, England was nowhere on the street. So this is a reality we have to face. And if Indology does not keep up with the world, it's going to die out. So it's up to Indian institutions and so on to evolve the new Indology. All right, that was the first question. Are you seeing the questions, or shall I continue reading them out?
We are not able to see the questions.
Okay. Then there is one from Kanchan Gogate. Do you suggest a specific methodology? Do you see it now? Is someone else able to read out the question?
No.
From whom, sir, you're talking about? So there's one from Ujjwal Jain. There's from Arjun Narayan. How can we bring in contemporary thinkers like Tagore or Aurobindo in this fold?
Well, simply by bringing them in, that's all.
Yeah, simply by bringing them in. And look, one of the problems with institutionalized Indology is it decides what is legitimate, right? So only certain scholars can be read, and certain scholars are not part of the academic canon. We have to question that whole notion of canon, which is already happening. I have students now in Germany who just come and say, I want to do this. And you have to say, sure, if this is your contemporary interest, take an example. It's not a real example. I want to write a dissertation on Rihanna. Popular culture has moved on. Academia cannot survive as a 200-year-old hangover of European or of Eurocentrism. Okay, continue. Next question.
So there's a question directly towards you, Dr. Bagchi. Great presentation, Dr. Bagchi. What do you think is the responsibility of the academicians towards the general society?
Okay, wonderful question. Thank you, Arun Narayan. The responsibility of an academic is huge because they hold the ivory tower is a watchtower. From that watchtower, they watch over society. They intervene in society by writing petitions or by giving legal opinions, as we saw in the California textbook case. So they have a tremendous sort of responsibility towards the general society. Everything they do must be guided by ethics, self-control, dharma. You know, if these things are not there, and if academics are playing with fire to advance their own careers and starting little fires in faraway countries, whether it's in the Middle East by putting some Muhammad caricatures, the price is always paid by the locals. So that level of responsibility has to be there. Let me also address the California textbook case and go back to a historical parallel. You know that there was anti-segregation legislation in America where blacks children were taken in school buses to white schools. And because the governor refused to allow them and there was a lot of jeering and opposition, they were accompanied by military guards and marched into school. And the philosopher Hannah Arendt, I'm a disciple of the Arendtian school of philosophy, she wrote an article, I think it was in the New Yorker, where she said, this is wrong. And everyone was shocked. Everyone said, what is wrong with desegregation? Is that not the right thing to do? And she said, look, I'm not arguing from the perspective of state policy. I'm arguing from the perspective of that singular little girl. Think of that girl, 6 or 7 years old, in her little frock and white socks, being marched into school with armed guards, with people jeering and spitting under that violence. You have to think about it from the perspective of that singular child. Do not conduct your state battles, your policy conflicts on the backs of those children. This was her argument. It's a wonderful humanitarian argument. Whatever the dispute over Indian history, what gave Witzel the right to conduct that argument on the backs of little Indian school children or little American school children? Was he there as a pedagogue? Was he there as a father? Was he there as a humanist? This man is a racist. This man has created so much mischief. Here he is doing it to children. I live in a country where we have, on the main train station, there is a little statue of Jewish children being dragged off onto the night train to Auschwitz. This cannot continue. Academics have to take their duty seriously, and ethics. When you are looking at someone for tenure or for a grant, you do not just look at their publications, as has been the practice in academia. You look at their personal moral integrity. That must come back as a factor. Thank you.
Yes.
Go ahead. Yes.
Yeah. Just a supplement to what you're saying. You see, I remember that, in fact, I used to ask this question that during 1947 freedom movement, how many, academics, how many professors and teachers and so on actually participated in the freedom movement. And another example is that those who used to participate, they used to get rusticated from the colleges because in that period. So by and large, I should say Indian academia has, and this is a very painful state of affairs, that Indian academia has always remained aloof from the social, evil that persists in the society. So this, and that I think this is also due to the way in which the British university system was introduced in India. The British university system introduced in India was not for the sake of knowledge as such, but it was for getting the faithful servants of the administration. So that was, I mean, all and all, there are so many factors which are working in this kind of profile of academicians as far as social reality is concerned, and this has happened in India. Yeah.
Next question.
Sharatji, if I may interrupt, I will have to leave in 5 minutes because I have a meeting coming up. May I be allowed to make one remark concluding from my end? Not at all concluding the debate, it can of course go on. Which is this: if we look at, Western civilization, if there is such a thing, largely European with its extension in America, and if we look at Indian civilization, there are of course others. What strikes me, and I make this point often to my Indian audience, which seems to be new for them, though it is nothing new. And the point which strikes me is that if we look at the 20th century alone, we have 2 world wars, we have concentration camps, we have, of course, the culmination of anti-Semitism, which, as Joydeep has often emphasized, has much older roots in Europe. We have earlier than that wars of religion. We have, supreme bloody examples of religious intolerance and persecution. We have so much of dark chapters in the history of Western civilization that simply have no equivalent in Indian civilization, and we keep forgetting that. And yet, the discourse of Indology in the last 10, 20 years, if you read people like Sheldon Pollock and others, has been that it is Hinduism which has been a major inspiration for the rise of Nazi ideas, and for even they try to actually deflect the whole creation of the Aryan myth and blame India for it, with some twisted arguments around the Rig Veda and identification of some of Indian population with the Aryan myth. And they have completely tried to reverse the whole discourse and blame Indian civilization for some of the Western ills. So I think we need to be very critical of the West in the true sense of critical. It doesn't mean that I cannot appreciate great Western literature, great Western music, and I do appreciate great Western literary figures and thinkers, and there's a lot of wonderful contributions of Western civilization, and there's a lot of horrible contributions too. And we have to be aware of them, and sometimes put a mirror in front of them and say, look at what you have achieved, and please step down from your pedestal, have a little humility, especially when you deal with a living thing, a living organism, which is Indian civilization, and which you cannot comprehend without a lifetime study. So this is, a very simple observation that ultimately there is still a supreme rule of Western arrogance, sometimes very active, sometimes passive, internalized, not so conscious, and yet it remains there. So I think the West needs a lot of lessons in humility, and sometimes it takes a small invisible particle like a virus to teach some potent lessons on its vulnerabilities, but we need to be a little more assertive and put this mirror in front of them, that there is so much in Western, even recent contributions that India is quite innocent of. So let us keep this in mind among other important lessons we have learned. With this, I will take my leave, if you permit.
So, yeah, certainly, Michelle bhai, surely you have made a great contribution to this discussion, and yeah, actually now I think the time is up, and there is one question I find in my chat box, that don't you think that considering the total unawareness of the past in India, Indology was like a necessary evil? No, I don't think so, because I mean, in the absence, I mean, there is a presupposition that in the absence of Indology, Indians were not at all aware of their own past. That was not true. I mean, this simply means that this question ignores, it seems, that the fact that Indians were very much aware of their own history. It's not that only when Indology came into existence that they became aware of their own history. It's not so. It's certainly not so. So it is. It is. I don't know whether Indology should be called as evil or necessary evil. That's a
If
different.
you permit me, Sharanji, I would say that this is one of the colonial stereotypes that Indians had no sense of history. It has been addressed by a number of scholars.
Yeah.
And dealt with quite in depth. The whole issue is that, and more recently, Professor Shonalika Kaul of JNU has done brilliant analysis of this whole stereotype and how to answer it. And it is just in a nutshell the fact that Indians' approach to history was very different. It functioned on a completely different level. And there is nothing to say that Western so-called, again, scientific history, which is, as Joydeep rightly explained, a tall claim, was in any way superior or is in any way superior even now. So there's a long tradition of history and historical tradition in India, which has its own standing, its own framework, and it has to be understood before even we can start addressing the colonial stereotype. With this now, I will take my leave, and thank you very much. Thank you very much. I will rejoin in the next few days if possible. I will try to rejoin the event. Thank you. Sharaji, my gratitude to you and to ICCR in general. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So, so the host, ICCR, Joydeep, I must thank you formally for this presentation, and it has generated lots of questions also. First, we thought that there are no questions, but there were in fact many questions. And well, this is how the things ought to go. So with this, I thank all the panelists who have attended this today's session. I am seeing Professor Zamkhedkar, Professor Kannal. Then I'm also, I was for some time before I could see Nandita Krishna ji. And also I saw Radha Vallabh Tripathi ji at the beginning. So everyone was present, and I'm sure everyone has enjoyed today's discussions. Now I can see Nandita ji once again. And so now we meet tomorrow at 3 as per our schedule, and we look forward to tomorrow's great presentations, one by Professor Zamkhedkar and another by Dr. Nandita Krishna ji. And in fact, her presentation is on an entirely different theme altogether, the relationship between environment and Indian history. So that I've found quite fascinating, and at least I have not heard of that much. So I'm greatly looking forward to her presentation tomorrow. Thank you. Thank you, ICCR. I can't see all of them, but I think I can see. I can see Vedi ji and who else? I can see Dr. Tyagi.
Yes, sir.
Isn't?
Yes, sir.
I can also see her, and I hope you have also enjoyed these discussions. ICCR team has enjoyed these discussions.
Thoroughly, sir. They were really nice, and being a person from history, it was very nice for me. I could revive my old days, and I could really get back to the curiosity of learning more into Indology. So
good.
Thank you so much, sir.
Okay then. Thank you very much for today, and we are all now logging off. Thank you very much. Okay. Vediji, thank you very much. See you tomorrow at 3.
So, if you permit me, on behalf of ICCR, I would like to thank each and everyone here or present over here. In fact, due to other commitments, DG and Deputy DG and President Sir had to move. But they will definitely find time for the presentations made by the two eminent speakers today. And their deliberations and their points will be well taken by ICCR. And we'll get a final report on these webinars, and we'll take a way forward to plan our policies for the promotion of the Indology and other aspects of India. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Okay, I'm logging out now.
Yes,
okay, Jaideep,
okay.
see you.
Thank you, sir.